All right. If please keep yourself on mute, as your audio may actually interrupt the speaker's talk if you've got any background sounds. So if you can, please keep yourself on mute. There will be questions that you can ask the speaker. What we'll do is I'll send out a link for Slido where you can pop in questions as the talk is going on. And at the end of the session, we can address the questions that you'd have raised. So feel free to ask any questions during the talk on that Slido link. I'll drop it in the chat after the intro. Also, feel free to drop off if you need to. While we'd love to have you here for the whole call, we do understand sometimes there may be pressing issues that come up at home or wherever you're taking the call from. So you can still drop off if you need to. Just to kick off, I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors, Peach Payments, Offers and Root. Their support for our community allows us to host events like this, and especially the in-person ones where we can provide snacks and drinks and get a venue for our events. We have a tech leadership newsletter that goes out once a month. If you've never heard about it, it is a collection of links that we found over the month to articles that are useful for people who are interested in learning more about their engineering leadership journey. It is sent out once a month on the day of the meetup, so a couple of hours after the meetup. So there will be one going tonight, and then after that, you receive it once a month. You can scan this QR code if you've got your phone close to you, and you can sign up with just putting in your email, or you can grab the link at the bottom there. I will also share the link in the chat after the intro. We are also on Twitter as @TechLeadershipX, or we are on X as it's now called. We post a tweet once a day. Also links to interesting articles we found that are about engineering leadership. So if you're also just trying to learn and grow more on if you're on Twitter and you want to learn a bit more daily as opposed to waiting a month for links. We also share and announce our meetups as they're coming up once we know where the venue is and who the speaker is going to be on Twitter. Offers in, one of our sponsors, always sponsors swag. If you live in South Africa and you stand a chance of winning some swag that they will send to you and deliver at your office or home, I'll send the link to a type form that you just need to fill in with your details. Also send that in the chat once I've done with the intro. And if you're lucky enough, you will get some swag from them in the next couple of days. Offers in are also asked us to share that they recently completed a documentary around the origins of TypeScript, which they're going to be screening in a couple of places, one of them being Cape Town at the Labia Theatre. There'll be snacks, drinks, popcorn, and a chance to meet other people in tech if you're interested in going to this event. I'll share the link. They have a limited set for us at Tech Leadership of slots. So for the people who enter, you may not get confirmation from them, but they will reach out to you if you're one of the lucky people who get selected. So once again, the link will be in the links I share if you're interested in this, and there'll be a little note you need to put in the promo code to say you're coming from Tech Leadership for them to know you're coming from our event. All right. Now just to do the speaker introduction, I am going to quickly share a different screen here. All right, our speaker for this month is Irfaan. If you've been coming to Tech Leadership quite frequently, you will notice that he's been with us before, so we're happy to have him come and speak to us again. I've known Irfaan for many years. We actually started our jobs at the same company on the same day back in 2011. And worked together for 4 years before we both eventually moved to different companies. And he's gone on to have an interesting career where he's explored different companies from startups to corporates, and worked in different spaces. So he's got some wide knowledge that we're always interested in learning about. And today he's coming to share with us on a topic around lessons learned from mid-career leadership failures. So excited to have Irfaan. And with that, I will hand over the screen to him to give us his talk. And I'll drop those links just after I've done that. Thanks, Irfaan.
Super, thanks, Tanaka. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're warm wherever you are. I always start these talks with the same bit of advice, which is if you want to be happy at the end of this talk, just get rid of all expectations to just enjoy what the content's going to be. Just so you know, like in this talk, you'll hear me use a mix of like first person and third person. It can be a little bit confusing, but wherever it's my story, I try to keep it like quite first person. And then wherever I think it's more general, it's a little bit more third person. Okay, super. So a little bit about me and my career story, and sort of why do I get to speak to you today. So 2011, like Tanaka said, I started my corporate journey in Cape Town, what I call like the brilliant basics. Really, corporates are not super sexy now, but it's a great place to learn what it means to be a professional. And really, that was the bottom up part of my career. I worked in tech teams, like in a product role, and built really strong technical individual contributor sorts of skills. So a long time there, 2017, I wanted to do something new and see the world a little bit, and moved into management consulting. So a lot of suits, and that time in Joburg, super different, and was a flip from the bottom up, like understanding, building information like very slowly to moving very quickly and taking a top-down approach. And in these roles, working with all of these companies, a big part of my responsibility was managing team delivery. And these two things are like super clearly related. I was tired of doing slides, and I said, I don't want to just write strategy. I want to actually deliver on strategy. So in 2020, just a few months before COVID, actually, I started my first startup or scale up. And that's been sort of like where I've been ever since. So instead of sort of bottom up and top down, really this has been sort of like inside out, sort of joining a team or a company, making those changes. And in the last, and just an open invitation, if you, a year ago I moved to the Netherlands, and if you are thinking about moving here or have any questions, just feel free to reach out. Super happy to share like the experience, and if you have any specific questions about like budget, how it works, the culture. There's a big community here, but it's not as pretty as Cape Town. Yeah, and so in the last couple of months, I've been thinking about like this red line quite a lot, because I've been moving from, let me go back a slide, from managing teams to what I call leading teams. And I've been like actually quite uncomfortable with that change. And so over a couple of months working with sort of like some peers and colleagues and coaches, there's a question that someone asked, which sort of I really sort of attached myself to, which is, what is a bias that I have about everyone else, a generalization that I think is not true about me? And it was just sort of like how can I find out a little bit about that blind spot? And I thought about it a little, and really the Peter Principle came to mind. And the Peter Principle is something when I'm in my less good moods or less healthy moods, if I see and in my opinion, an incompetent like manager, I'll say like Peter Principle, like they got there because like they got promoted to incompetence. And why this like really stood out for me is part of what this says is what you did in your previous job does not necessarily mean like you'll be successful in your new job. And this is like a big gap that I didn't know I had, which was what is the difference between managing teams, projects, delivery, all the things, and leading. And what I want to share with you today is, especially in this block over here, like when it comes to leading, like some specific failures, like things that did not go well, like F-ups, like shitstorms, and the rest, and my reflections on them, for a couple of reasons. The one is just to, I think, healthy to share, and if you have experienced things that are similar, just like to know that you're not alone. And I think they tell a sort of like broadly an interesting story. And they're all around the sort of like this leadership thing. And I'm going to talk about leading yourself, myself, leading with others. So what does it mean to work with peers and colleagues, and leading others? So line managers and the rest. All right. So let's start with the first one, which is under leading yourself. A very interesting realization I have is that my decision-making can be like super emotional. So if you're free and you're a keyboard, would love you to maybe just type in the chat, like what percentage of your decisions do you think are emotional, like versus rational, right? So ideally, and these can just be work decisions. Ideally at work, we think like 100% of them are like super rational. Like if you had to give yourself a score, like 70, 90, these are high numbers, or higher than anticipated. Yeah, but Kashin, like Gallup's poll rates it at about 70% of the decisions we make are emotional. Now, there's good reason for that. It's because when you are doing your job, like you internalize or you subconsciously expert at what you do, and so you rely on instincts quite a lot. But there's a part of this, which a couple of stories or failures here that sort of that were interesting for me. The first one, I was working with my team, and we were presenting a piece of work back to the CEO. And in this very sort of like public space, he just sort of like launched into me, like in front of the team, saying like working on the wrong thing, like clearly misaligned, and just like highlighted my incompetence. And it was like unbelievably intense, and sort of like what I ended up doing was just sort of like sucking it up and saying, I hear you, like I'm gonna be better. And I thought that was a decision I was making sort of like very rationally, like I'm gonna be a big boy, and just deal with it. But that I found out was sort of like a post-rationalization. A second story of failure, I had an employee that a report that was sort of just on a hiding to nothing, having on poor performance, and reporting lines changed to me, and I had to work on exiting him from the company. So doing a performance improvement plan and working through the process and negotiating with HR, like what that would look like. And I took like way longer, probably twice the time that I needed to take, because I felt I needed to spend a lot more time with this to be fair to them. And that was expensive for the company, and probably not the right thing to do. And the last kind of like example here is I think we've all been through restructures and layoffs and retrenchments in the last while. In one of the ones I was involved in, like we set the plan, announced the restructure, and I just overworked like unbelievably hard. And in my mind, I was thinking like I need to set an example and show everyone that we're doing our best to make this work. And the rationalization in my head was like, I'm deciding to be a role model. And I didn't realize that all of these decisions, reactions I was making, like were not like super rational. They were very emotional. And then working through this with a coach, like it turns out I have this this emotional profile called the survivor, which sort of has like its in its healthiest phase, which is about sort of like commitment and purpose and the rest. And and in its unhealthiest, so like under like deep stress, is very self-sacrificing. And sort of like what's interesting, like knowing this now versus then is what would I do differently, knowing that like I'm falling into a trap like that is linked to my emotion. And maybe to share like a little bit about like what I've learned. So if this is something that you fall into, like what are some things to do? The hardest part, and especially because it's a little bit like feelingsy and fluffy, is understanding your own motivations. So going through, taking like the hours or with someone to understand like which of these you fall into and why. And through that lens, like assessing your own behavior. What did you intend to do? What did it actually end up doing? And it's super uncomfortable because you have to like understand or identify your rationalization and then figure out how to like work through it. And then knowing yourself at your worst. And then the least worst outcome, which is sort of like the theme of the talk, is you will still 100% make emotional decisions. I do all the time. But the great thing now is like you have a model to like understand what they are. And it's a non-judgmental model because it's sort of like this thing, the screen box on the side. It's not you self-criticizing, and it doesn't have a good or a bad. It just sort of is what it is. There's an awareness of yourself, and I found that I can accept who I am a little bit more and sort of quieten down sort of the heavy voice. But the really powerful thing is, especially in like with my new managers now and peers, I am just more coachable because I can share this language. Yeah, and if you have any questions on like resources or things I've done or used like to get here, yeah, please drop a note. I'll answer those. But this is sort of failure number one, like not knowing that my decisions were super emotional. All right, still talking about leading myself. The biggest weirdest challenge I had was like moving from managing to leading. I didn't realize that how I needed to learn is changing. So I have a super conventional academic and achievement background, like did well at university because I knew what was required and how to tick the box. As an individual contributor at a corporate, that's also like super clear, like be good at Excel and your pivot tables and like how you write a report and all the rest. In consulting, it's even clearer because you work in frameworks and everything is super structured and tries to be like hyper rational. And my big attraction was always towards like doing an MBA, because for me it was defined. There was a curriculum and you know what to do there. But my ambition was like to move from developing strategy to operationalizing strategy. And in the sort of like scale up world, I realized that there were these gaps, but it was impossible to learn how to fill them in. And the two big ones that I spent a long time trying to skill up on was, the one was like influence, like how do I manage change? Like I could do the change plan and the tool and the comms and those pieces, but are like the more emotional pieces and getting people excited and aligned or agreeing to disagree just like evaded me. I couldn't find a way to do that. And then the second one, which was also like very lumpy and weird, was coaching. Like if I want to coach others, like to help them improve on their performance, like where do I start? Do I need a degree? What does it look like? And I always felt embarrassed to do it for the first time. And the unintended consequences of this was, as I moved into like this fuzzy world where I'm working with peers on like big topics which are around like people and culture or like a way of doing things, I confused what I knew as familiar with being good. And so there might be a different way to like a different topology for a team or like how we structure something or what we do. But for me, if I knew what it was better. And sometimes it was hard to navigate two options that were different, but not one was the better, neither one is better or worse. And sort of like a little aha moment for me here was like listening to some coaching. And the insight was fear and anger give you bad advice. And like a model that I think of or use is sort of like this Jim Collins model between like management and leadership. And when I talk about influence and coaching, I'm really talking about like filling in this gap here. There's like a big one moving from there here to there. And the fear part was, for the first time in a very long time, I needed to get like much worse at what I was doing in my like competency and capability than I was used to before. And the idea that I couldn't just sort of like move upwards, like up into the right, like it was going to be worst first, just got in the way. And what this meant was like, I didn't know how to start. Like I kept getting stuck on doing Coursera courses or reading books, but like not being able to do anything with them. And I felt just like increasingly guilty and incompetent, and I had massive imposter syndrome. So I don't know if you had the same too. I secretly hope you do, so I don't feel alone, but if you didn't, it's also amazing. But a couple of things that I've had to learn on how to manage this. And so the first one that's useful, especially if you think about like what does it mean to learn new things, is separating my core skills. What am I foundationally good at? Like things that are not questioned, like I'm a structured problem solver, and I'm good at delivery, and what I'm growing into. And the growth stuff has to be messy and has to be uncertain. And being able to separate those two things and knowing how to allocate time, especially with like a coach and a manager, is useful. The second one is also like understanding how you learn, and sort of title of the slide is relearning how to learn. When you're moving away from technical topics to people and cultural pieces, it's like a new model. So I never thought I would enjoy like sitting in a circle and doing coaching and reflecting. I enjoyed like books and pieces of paper and knowing what it is. But like there's a new sort of dynamic there. And then the most interesting one is suddenly like 10 years into your career, you run out of like things to do. Like I could do an MBA, but it like wouldn't like specifically help me with any core skills. You have to do what I've learned is like horizontal learning, which is you have to put together pieces of things from different places and create your own learning. And something that helps a lot, and it's a word I use a lot during this talk, is sort of like finding really great coaches and speaking to folks. Least worst outcome, again, you will and I will still suck at new things, but there is a model for how to practice. And it's worst first and it gets better. And the most important thing for me now is like when I have like a weird culture, people, management question, I have these like ex-colleagues and peers that I can like ask or think out loud with, which is the most powerful thing. Yeah. So that was failure number 2. And then the last one related to like leading myself is maybe more of an opinion than a failure, but like in the last 3 years working at scale ups, like funding and VC has been unconsciously distracting to what I needed to do. So if you haven't worked in a sort of startup or scale up before, there are these phases like at which money comes in. And the company's not profitable and sort of burns through that money to grow. And for all the companies I've worked in, scale-ups, different-ish industries, like different parts of the world, the hiring conditions that I was hired in versus the ones I was in sort of like immediately after had changed. So it was, hey, we're growing, we want to get 50 more people, and this is the role. And then joining was like, oh, we need to sort of like cut costs, or there's COVID, or sort of like a tech recession, and that changes. And so very interestingly, like what I tend to get hired for, which is sort of like the structured product work versus what I actually do, which is like more organizing, like within teams changes. And in the teams I was leading, there was a semi-consistent like reconfiguration, top down. We would say like, oh, we need a new role. We need like this, like a sales engineer or a new kind of like analytics role. Or it would change to, we need to restructure the team so that we're working on the right like product priorities and can deliver faster. Or like in the worst case, it's like we need to downsize and sort of like trim people. So what is the retrenchment plan here? And all of these things, in my opinion, have always been driven, at least initially, from like board and investors. So like where that venture capital comes from. And there's sort of like two and a half parts to it. The first one is when wanting to grow, we want to spend money on humans to move a growth metric. And then when wanting to survive, we want to compress how much we spend on humans to survive. And while all of this feels very, very ordinary, especially when you're in the mix of it, it's actually quite destabilizing, because when you are growing like teams and functions, you need like many months and years to like, and a plan to work towards. But when you're swinging between like growing, changing, and those things, you just don't have enough time to make meaningful changes. And this is sort of like a summary model of like where VC comes in, and the red block that I highlighted was around like that cost sensitivity. And sort of you either need to grow or cut costs, and not always that black and white. And the big challenge, and one that I haven't figured out yet, so this is maybe the worst slide in the pack, is how to integrate that will always change into like a sustainable marathon pace around like growing teams, like stable culture, allowing people to grow. And so the specific failures I've had, like when it comes to this, is the first one was when we were super optimistic and we thought we wanted to grow. I developed hiring plans that were like too optimistic and too complex for the environment that we would end up in. So either like too many layers, or like roles that were too specialized, and not enough sort of like multi-stacked or multi-talented people, and like specializing those roles. And then the hardest failure was needing to suddenly like develop a plan to restructure or reorg when there's super high emotions, like all the names next to the dots on the slide that you're cutting, and you can't do it like objectively. So what are some of the things that might be useful, helpful here? The first one I think is just to be aware of like what that pressure is, and if you can like know what those numbers are. How much runway is there? What is the OpEx for like your team, like, and understanding how big or small that is and how profitable you are. A slightly terrible thing to do, but absolutely worth doing, is to sit with your own management team and figure out, what does it mean for us to cut 20% of the cost in this team to cut 50%? And it's super uncomfortable because there are like names next to those roles, but doing this gives you a muscle to flex and forces you to have the conversation. A difficult one, but like a really great lesson learned from like the previous CTO I worked with, is hiring behind the curve after funding is secure, because things change in our environments. And the trade-off is a discomfort around like not moving fast enough, but a salary is a commitment on an ongoing expense, and super hard to get rid of. And then the last one is contracts and fractional resources. The least worst outcome here, it's always gonna suck again, but it's about having options and making decisions during peacetime. All right, that was number 3. The next set is sort of like some failures, horizontal failures, working with sort of like peers and colleagues. So the first one is like an interesting one because it talks about style, and it's sort of summarized as I'm really structured when it comes to delivery and projects. There's a roadmap, a plan. They like manage risks, like it's super rational and well thought out. But when it comes to coordinating with peers, which is the management work and arguably as important, if not more so, it tends to be like super casual. And like how this manifests, or some examples of like some of these failures, is having regular like one-on-ones with like peers, partners in the team, and talking through a decision, but not crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and being super aligned on what it means. Something that I realize happens to me and happens to everyone is when you're meeting with someone like every week, every month, and there's a topic that changes, recency bias really impacts your decision making. So if you have like 2 really great months around like people performance, and 1 bad month where someone doesn't perform, that bad month just like stays in your mind because it's not documented clearly. And then probably the most expensive failure here is because I wasn't driving this with like clear agendas and being able to align on multiple things. If there were 4 or 5 projects happening, I would need to have multiple check-ins with folks, so with the same person like 4 or 5 times to align on that specific piece, rather than having the regular meeting and aligning on all of those pieces. And as a result, it sort of fills up the calendar, and I just wasn't able to commit enough time to the most important things. And there's an idea here which I find like super interesting, which is like multi-layered calendaring. And this is more of an opinion and a preference than something sort of like concrete and objective. But the big shift for me from moving from Slack and emails to scheduling when I'm getting things done, and then also thinking about like how I use my calendar like very differently, has allowed me to be more intentional with where I spend my time. And things that I never did before, which are like super helpful now, and these are some specific examples that I've like pulled from like my own files, is documenting everything in one place. So when I'm having work sessions, what are the agendas, items, and having ongoing agendas with folks. So these are folks I meet with like every week, and every time something comes up, I'm able to like put it down and forget about it. So to talk about what works there and what doesn't, relying on memory, especially like in unstructured environments, is a little bit of suicide. And writing it down definitely works. A commonplace document, sort of like the ones I shared here, super helpful. Sort of David Allen of Get Things Done fame says like, rely on the system, like don't rely on your memory. And the most important thing in my sort of this part of my career so far has always been always send the minutes. So any small conversation or alignment on something that you're doing on a call, on a Slack, like loop everyone in and summarize what you've agreed on and why. It saves misunderstanding, and also documenting is easier. And I think there's a general sort of school of thought around being like more calendar driven, because where you spend your time reflects what you actually get done. Yeah, so that was on like how I spent time with colleagues. The spiciest one, I think, is going to be this next one here, which is working in scale up. So moving out of companies with like really established HR functions where there's an HR business partner. And now I'm like leading teams and people, and I have an amount of authority to make decisions. I did not take the time to like figure out what my HR responsibilities were. And in scale ups, the big difference to a corporate is your people team is a lot smaller, and so you just don't have enough people to put someone looking after every team. Probably like a lot younger, and so you don't have these experienced folks who are able to who are able to sort of who have experience like doing difficult things, exits, firings, and the rest. Where there's a big focus on culture and vibe and being super nice, sometimes we can miss the ability to execute on important HR pieces. So how do you deal with bad behavior? How do you exit a poor performer and the poor performance, the performance improvement process? And so some specific failures here, and these are probably some of the emotionally like the hardest things I've had to deal with in the last couple of years. An employee reporting into me needed to be exited during a probation, and I thought that entire thing rested on me. And working through that process, being legally compliant, like working with the emotions of someone who's just joined, is being told like their probation is being extended under these reasons, and defending the roles and responsibilities they were hired in is just like insane, insanely like hard, draining, and having to do that like alongside your real job. And what I should have done was like asked HR to lead that, and I'll support like I just took that on too much. And then in a second and like more interesting kind of cultural trap I fell into was where my HR team was the friendly ear for an employee, and they had an issue like related to me, which was like super emotional, and HR got like very charged and like needed me to resolve it, and sort of it was hard to like bring it back to like an objective view and have them as the neutral like arbitrator rather than like someone who's defending something. And the absolute worst failure I did in my time sort of with HR related things was like not documenting enough. So performance processes, agreements on sort of like expectation and alignment, like my lesson to everyone would be to document. And so a way to think about this is think about like what typical HR responsibilities are, and you can think of any list here. On this one, I've highlighted the ones that really jump out to me. Like some painful ones is around like, what is remuneration policy? Sometimes as a manager, like you are the messenger and you need to have more help on that one. How do you manage like bad behavior and disciplining, and who is responsible for coaching? And so some sort of things I've learned and advice I would give here is like, if you haven't already, like have HR sit down with you and have designed that explicit partnership on responsibilities, so that you know who's doing what. A second important one is to have a shared view of every individual's performance. And the trap that you fall into here is having to always defend your seemingly subjective view on someone, and you need a partner to spread that load with. And this diagnosed point I put into brackets here because it's also like a very challenging one, which is you'll need to build an opinion on how good your HR function is and its ability to execute, and calibrate what you do accordingly. And then to quickly run through the rest, document everything, especially performance and expectation related pieces. If it is your responsibility to do performance improvements and to exit employees, practice that as much as possible. So one of the most awkward but most powerful things I ever did was like with a colleague, practice like the bad news interview that we are not like your performance is not up to scratch, and this is what we're going to do next. And that mechanical practicing helps. And a very important one is people interview well or poorly, and sometimes it's hard to know how well they'll do. Like be ruthless with how you use probation periods. Like save the niceness for later. Like know how you're going to evaluate them. And hopefully out of this, you'll be able to get some good playbooks around how you manage these difficult cases. All right, so that was that was leading with others, so working with colleagues. And then the last part is sort of leading others, so with like reports and the rest. So this one is a link to the previous one. With the first couple of reports I ever had, out of the earnestness in like wanting to be a great manager, when I had a report that was unclear about their career goals, I overcompensated and put in like way too much effort. And sort of like the specific failures I had here was I projected my own growth journey onto someone else, and like not realizing like how important like the motivation and context is. And that just becomes like very difficult for them to metabolize. They need to buy in and be switched on. And then an interesting one, which took me a while to sort of like calibrate in my head, especially around performance cycles, is distinguishing between baseline of a job, like you did your job and you are continuing to like earn a salary, versus like what does it mean to level up. And it might be like a South African cultural piece, but I think the entitlement with folks can be like, I did my job, you should be leveling me up. And the two things are super separate. Documentation like was another failure, like having these conversations and they feel quite great and not writing down expectations. And I think and this maybe also like the hardest one for me like right now is when I give performance feedback, like I always want to be motivating, and sometimes that like doesn't allow me to reflect like harsh realities. And it's also based like I had what I thought was a terrible experience with a manager very early in my career, like year number 3 or 4, where I got like the worst feedback around like progress, but ended up being like the most useful way for me to kick forward. And so like the theme of this failure here is when it comes to career growth, I need to own the process and the expectations, but they need to own the actual like growth and motivation, and like and there needs to be like an adult separation of the two. And this is the model that sort of like allowed it to click for me. Like when it comes to being a leader or manager, like my job is to get folks into like this core middle orange kind of piece, like to help them with their performance enough to do their job, to make sure that the environment is friendly enough. But moving on and beyond that has to be up to them. Like I can hope to be inspiring, but I can't own that for them. That is absolutely theirs. This is a super powerful model to use, one, to like calibrate, like where you have many employees. So put every person in your team in a box, have everyone else do the same and see where you agree and disagree. And then the second one is to calibrate expectations, like where you're responsible and where's someone else. So, I mean, just stating some of those things again, having clear hygiene, like what are the things you have to do about in your job. Something that I didn't do well was saying, this is what I expect from you. Do you agree? Writing that down and then comparing actual performance versus that, and being like super specific around what does it mean to deliver on spec, quality, time, and having that down. And then everything to get to this middle here is around like management, right? And everything to get out of like to grow out is coaching. And the coaching role is about allowing that person to be the best version of themselves. The management role is a little bit more active. Salary entitlement is like an irritating one, and beware about sort of like that expectations. Include more people in the process, because it's very lonely, like doing these things on your own, and really learning that like you are responsible for a transparent process. They are responsible for the ownership. And sort of like least worst outcomes, there'll always be misalignment around like expectations or well people have done. But a useful thing to have is like what are the strategies to go from like to go to the right, to go up and here. And so you can be a little bit more specific there. All right. And then the very last one to share with today is a little bit more conceptual, which was when I've been leading teams, I relied almost exclusively on personal interactions for developing insights on like what to do. And so I would do one-on-ones with every person and get their feedback and sort of piece it all together, instead of looking as a team as a system. And sort of like the big failures I had here is I would fall into the trap of like addressing individual issues of individual preference and not like the team purpose, not the team dynamic. And a slightly, an even more terrible thing is I became like a moral judge about like who is right or wrong or what is good or bad, rather than just observing the system and bringing that feedback. And then the hardest thing for me was sometimes I could get it to work by mediating and making sure everyone is heard, but it required me to be like in that team or in those teams, and I became a bottleneck for how we move forward. And there's like a confusing moment there. And sort of interestingly, like sort of what I'm talking about was like this model on the left here, where I'm like talking to like everyone individually, rather than being a little bit more objective. And being able to think of teams as systems just gives you like a better vocabulary around how to codify how they work, and to actually influence an outcome. And so some things to think about here, or that I think about anyway, is like re-emphasizing for myself, like teams exist to produce results. Like that is the role. Like, and you need to step away from like the individuals to think about that. If you evaluate teams as systems, like thinking about how they're structured, how do they communicate, what are the beliefs, it gives you a greater set of like leverage around how to influence that team, and diagnose the system, not the individuals, because the individuals will change. Teams are pure chaos. They change all the time. And if you get a team to be good, you can guarantee that they will become terrible over time. It is a repeating cycle. And so having a model for like evaluating interactions is useful. And part of scaling yourself as a leader is about not getting in the way. All right. So that's a super summary of sort of everything I shared, sort of some ideas around leading yourself, which is around like where do you make decisions. For me, it was like relearning how to learn, and an opinion. I think VC sort of like can be super distracting. Working with others is like an interesting interaction. For me, I value like courtesy and compliance, and so being more sort of like action oriented is harder. And then working with HR is sort of like been an interesting shift. And then leading others, sort of like who owns career growth and what is the responsibility there, is a spiky topic, but an important one. And then a more interesting one is understanding how our teams work. All right, so that was that. And then the last thing I wanted to share is also like a very spicy idea, but it's a little bit of a prediction. And it's based on these things that are sort of happening. So sort of like Elon Musk gets rid of like 6,000 people. And a lot of like big voices in Silicon Valley are talking about like getting more aggressive with like how we work. So doing more with less, like work at uncomfortable pace, and there's sort of like, I think, an aggression of culture coming in, which will be interesting. And I think like a lot of folks will enjoy it, but I think super super important to reflect on the kind of things we talked about today, which was like where you're getting in your own way. Otherwise, this becomes a little bit toxic. Great, and that's everything I have to say about that. I hope it was entertaining, if not interesting. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Irfaan. Yeah, really enjoyed that. I think it really showed you've had a wide range of experiences, lots of interesting ones. And yeah, glad that you came and joined us and shared your learnings. And yeah, in particular, I was like really impressed with the way you shared them, and that you brought the problem, and then you also gave people possible solutions and routes they could use to address the situations. So yeah, I'm hoping that everyone who attended picked at least one thing that resonated with them that they're going through right now, and hopefully can apply the learnings that you shared. There are a couple of questions, probably more than we can address before we need to call it. I'm just going to start asking from the top. What I would also share, and hopefully you're happy with that, is if we don't address anyone's question, they can always find you on LinkedIn and drop you a message, because I think some of them were even about like the difference in Netherlands and South Africa, and recommending a coach and things like that, which I think perhaps you could chat with them. But you can share how you prefer to be contacted, perhaps.
Yeah. So what maybe I can commit to is I can share like some responses to all of these as a comment on the meetup page or the link. And then maybe we can pick like one or two to chat about now.
All right.
I mean, the easy one, I'm looking at the list here. Will imposter syndrome ever leave? Like never. I guarantee it'll always be there. Like as you get better, you'll just be surrounded by like a better class of a person. Do you mind if I just jump around on the questions here, Tanaka?
Yeah, I think go ahead.
Yeah. Interesting one here is, while you made many decisions with emotions, did you find people reacted to the results of those decisions emotionally or triggering? How to navigate? I think I get this question. I was very scared to share like how I interface with, or like how I'm processing these things, like talking about like, oh, like this is my recommendation, but it comes from a place of like insecurity or whatever it is. Overwhelmingly, I find folks appreciate the vulnerability and open up a little bit more. I've never had a bad reaction or had someone like disregard a decision made. That said, I also like tend to, I'm a little bit selective with like who I share that with. So there has to be a little bit of trust before you can share that, but useful on that one. How different is HR and legal responsibilities in South Africa and the Netherlands? Very, very similar. I think the differences are all sort of like around culture and expectation. South Africa has a higher culture, has a culture of like higher like increases, promotions and raises. The Netherlands, it's not as much, like even less than inflation is pretty ordinary. Mention shared ways of coordinating. Are there specific tools? Tons. I'll actually share a list there. David Allen's Get Things Done, GTD is a great one. And there's a couple of like more contemporary ones that have like these systems. It's about finding one that works for you. At this part of your career, you have now acquired this new lens. Has this helped you reason about failure? Is it easier now? Do you find it hard still? And yeah, this is a super interesting question. Failure sucks, right? Like you want to be great at what you do. I think I think what you realize is if you are always like shooting the lights out, you're just like not trying hard enough. And there's a really uncomfortable question I have sometimes when I've done like really well, which is like have I really like lived up to my potential? Yeah, and so I guess I'm like a little bit more comfortable with it. But so failure isn't like an issue for me, but fear really is, like fear of like the unknown. What will people say? Like, I don't mind failing for myself, but fear is a super uncomfortable feeling. Yeah. I'll keep a track of the rest, and then I'll follow up with you, Tanaka, to add some notes. On LinkedIn, you'll see my this is my handle on LinkedIn, Irfaan. Let me just send this. If you have a specific question, or you just want to have like a 15-minute phone call, just say hi, and just say like we met at the tech leadership, and I'll super happy to chat about anything. Yeah, and I think that's our time.
All right. Thanks once again, Irfaan, and thanks for offering your time to the community. I just shared the links for everyone else. I just shared the links that I shared at the beginning of the meetup around tech leadership resources. If you want to just copy that before the call ends so that you can go through them later. Just a reminder for the Authors in TypeScript documentary, you will need to register with Tech Leadership. That will allow them to add you to the draw of entries for the people who are getting entries for Tech Leadership. So you may, if you don't get anything from them, or then you haven't got that, but if you then hear confirmation, then you can go and attend. Irfaan, as customary from the Tech Leadership community, we give our speakers a book of their choice, just as a token of appreciation for joining us and sharing your wisdom. That is sponsored by Matchbox Solutions, which is Benny's company, one of our co-organizers who was not here today. So he'll be in touch with you, and you can let him know what book you want to read next. And also, once again, I want to say thank you to our sponsors, Peach Payments, OfferZen, and Root for supporting our community. Our next event will be in person in Cape Town. We'll share the details once we lock in on a venue and we confirm who our speaker is going to be. So hopefully, if you live in Cape Town, we'll see you in a month's time. Else, that is all for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a good evening further. Bye-bye.
Bye.